There is one person in here. I don't know who it is, and you will not know who it is yet. But there is one person in here for whom the reading of Plato's Republic will be the most important intellectual experience you have at Yale. It is a book that one of you will go back to time and time again, and it will stick with you forever. And what I would like you to do is to remember this, and 4 years from now, when most of you are ready to graduate, if that one person in here would email me and let me know who it is. Okay? Maybe it'd be you. Maybe? Okay, possibly. Or you. Okay. But this is the book that started it all. The Apology, the Crito, these are warm-ups to the big theme, to the big book, the Republic. Every other book in this political science that has since been written, beginning with Aristotle's Politics and moving on to the present day, is in one way or another an answer, a response to Plato's Republic. It started the whole thing. The first and most obvious thing to say about the Republic is that it is a long book. Not the longest book you will ever read, but long enough. And in fact, in part because of this, we are only reading approximately half the book. The first 5 books, to be more specific. The first 5 books that deal with and culminate in the best city, Plato's ideal city, what he calls Callipolis, the just city, the beautiful city, ruled by philosopher kings. The second half of the book turns in somewhat different, certainly equally important directions, but would take us much more time than the time we have allotted to deal with. So you will read that on your own. You can take another course, what have you. The Republic is a very perplexing book, you will find out. Its meaning will not be evident to you on a first reading. It may not be clear to you on a 10th reading unless you approach it with the proper questions and the proper frame of mind. So let's start by asking a simple question. What is the Republic about? What is this book? What does this book deal with? This is a question that has perplexed and divided readers of Plato almost from the beginning. Is it a book about justice, as the subtitle of the book suggests? Is it a book about what we today might call moral psychology and the right ordering of the human soul, which is a prominent theme addressed in this work? Is it a book about the power of poetry and myth, what we would call the whole domain of culture, to shape souls and to shape our societies? Or is it a book about metaphysics and the ultimate structure of being, as certainly many of the later books of the Republic suggest? The theory of the forms, the image of the divided line, and so on and so on. Of course, it is about all of these things, and several others as well. But at least at the beginning, when we approach the book, we should stay on its surface, not dig, at least initially, too deeply. As one of the great readers of Plato of the last century once said, only the surface of things reveals the essence of things. And the surface of the Republic reveals that it is a dialogue. It is a conversation. We should approach the book, in other words, not as we might a treatise, but as we might approach a work of literature or drama. It is a work comparable in scope to other literary masterworks: Hamlet, Don Quixote, War and Peace, others you might think of. And as a conversation, as a dialogue, it is something that the author wants us to join, to take part in. We are invited to be not merely passive onlookers of this conversation, but active participants in that dialogue that takes place in this book over the course of a single evening. Perhaps the best way to read this book is to read it aloud, as you might with a play, to yourself or with your friends. But let's go a little further. The Republic is also a utopia, a word that Plato does not use, was not coined until many, many centuries later by Sir Thomas More. But Plato's book is a utopia. It is a kind of extreme. He presents an extreme vision of politics. He presents an extreme vision of the polis. The guiding thread of the book is the correspondence, and we will look at this in some length, and you will discuss it in your sections, no doubt. The guiding thread of the book is the correspondence, the symmetry between the parts of the city and the parts of the soul. Discord within the city, just as discord within the soul is regarded as the greatest evil. The aim of the Republic is to establish a harmonious city based on a conception of justice that, so to speak, harmonizes the individual and society. How to achieve that? The best city will necessarily be one that seeks to produce the best or highest type of individual. And Plato's famous answer to this is that the city, any city, will never be free of conflict, will never be free of factional strife, until, in his famous formula, kings become philosophers and philosophers become kings. The Republic asks us to consider seriously, what would a city look like ruled by philosophers? In this respect, it would seem to be the sort of perfect bookend to the Apology. Remember, the Apology viewed the dangers posed to philosophy and the philosopher and the philosophical life from the city. The Republic asks us, what would a city be like if it were ruled by Socrates or someone like him? What would it be like for philosophers to rule? Such a city would require, so Socrates tells us throughout the opening books, the severe censorship of poetry and theology, the abolition of private property and the family, at least among the guardian class of the city, and the use of selected lies and myths, what would today probably be called ideology or propaganda, as tools of political rule. It would seem that far from utopia, the Republic represents a radical dystopia, a satire, in some sense, of the best polity. And in fact, much of modern political science is directed against Plato's legacy. The modern state, as we have come to understand it, is based upon the separation of civil society from governing authority, the entire domain of what we call private life, separated from the state. But Plato's Republic recognizes no such separation or no such independence for a private sphere. And for this reason, Plato has often been cast as a kind of harbinger of the modern totalitarian state. A famous professor at a distant university was said to have begun his lectures on the Republic by saying, "Now we will consider Plato the fascist." And this was, in fact, the view popularized by one of the most influential books about Plato written in the last century, a book written by a Viennese emigre by the name of Karl Popper, who in the very early 1950s, right at the height of the Cold War and, of course, the end of the conclusion of the Second World War, wrote a book called The Open Society and Its Enemies. He wanted to know what were the causes or who were the responsible for the experiences of totalitarianism, both in Stalin's Russia and in Hitler's Germany. And in the course of this inquiry, he concluded that not only Hegel and Marx were important in that particular genealogy, but this went back to Plato as well. Plato principally. Plato, who he accuses Popper in a passionate, albeit not very well-written book, accuses Plato of being the first to establish a kind of totalitarian dictatorship. Is that true? Well, Plato's Republic is, we will discover as you read, it is a republic of a very special kind. It is not a regime like ours, devoted to maximizing individual liberties